My name is Shelby Radcliffe. I am the Vice President for Advancement at Willamette University. This program focuses on a presentation about Willamette and our future. President Steve Thorsett will explore our recent past, talk about some of the challenges ahead, and speak about our strategic path toward 2042, which is our bicentennial. It is my honor to introduce our 25th president, Steve Thorsett. Steve, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Shelby, and thank you all for joining us today. I had an opportunity at Alumni Weekend to talk about the future of Willamette to a great group of alumni, and we had a great discussion there. And it was decided that I should reprise that in a more available way and bring a broader set of alumni into the conversation about Willamette. So this is one step along that communications journey here. I was asked just before we started here to answer one question from Adam Duvander, of course, who is the recent chair of the alumni board, to wind up my talk today with a call to action for alumni. And instead of burying the lead here, I'm going to open my talk by answering his question about a call to action. And that's just to say that as we start to talk about the direction that Willamette is going, there is no more valuable asset that we have than a loud and proud Willamette alum who is engaged enough to have connected and learned about what's going on today on campus. And so that is all of you who are taking this time today to dial in and listen and learn and toward the later part of this discuss what's happening at Willamette. And so I'm so appreciative that you're doing that. And the main call to action for all of you is to take what you hear today. Hopefully, you'll find something to be very excited about and to talk with your broader networks, Willamette alumni networks, but also parent networks and others who need to learn more about what Willamette is doing and why Willamette is an important institution to the Pacific Northwest. I'll say a little bit more as we go along, I think, about all of the ways that that alumni can be helpful in connecting our students both to Willamette as prospective students and then to the world beyond Willamette as they begin to look for internships and then jobs leaving the institution. And our alumni network is very important, of course, for that as well. And then I'll have some really fun news to share about alumni giving and the philanthropic role that alumni play in supporting the institution. For those of you who have seen versions of this presentation before, it is a very dense presentation. As you know, I'm going to move through it fairly quickly. It has a huge amount of information, and I think there's something I learn new every time I go through and revise it, but hopefully there'll be something new for you or a different emphasis than the last time you saw it. And I'll have some updates since Alumni Weekend on the year ahead in particular. But I like to start just with a reminder in all of my talks about how far Willamette has come. Because I think understanding Willamette as a dynamic institution now more than 180 years old that has had certain continuities for that full 18 decades of life, including the commitment to service, which for many, many years has been best immortalized in our motto, but also the connection to the region and the role of Willamette as providing leadership across all sectors of civic society that has evolved to meet the changing needs of the region over the last 2 centuries and intends to continue to evolve to meet changing needs going forward. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that dynamism that continues at Willamette and why change layered on continuity really is the story of this exciting institution. So this, of course, is Willamette 120 years ago now, around the turn of the 20th century. And the State House has changed more than Waller Hall has since that year. At 180 years today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of the university today, because I think it's important to know where we are seeing success, where we are having challenges, and how the environment that the university is in has been evolving around us. So I'll talk about Willamette in both the regional and the national context, and then really lead into the ways that the changes that we are making now are setting Willamette up for our bicentennial 20 years from now. So, of course, the alumni all know something about the strengths of Willamette, but most of our alumni know one school very well and don't know the university as a whole nearly as well. So just a reminder that Willamette has historic strengths across its three traditional schools, and I'll talk about additions to those schools as well. The College of Arts and Sciences, our original school, of course, has long been ranked among the top 5, usually among the top 3 liberal arts colleges in the Northwest. It's a national liberal arts college, very similar to Whitman and Reed and Lewis and Clark and UPS in many ways, and renowned for the quality of its teaching. And I've talked in many settings about the faculty awards that show the attention the faculty give to teaching and learning. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. The College of Law, the first law school in the Pacific Northwest today, known for its experiential approach. It's a specialist in producing lawyers who know how to practice law, which has helped make it a leader in job placements in the Pacific Northwest, and known particularly, of course, for its strength in public law and in the education of business leaders for our region. The Atkinson Graduate School of Management, top-ranked MBA program year after year after year in Oregon, second in the Northwest only to the Foster School at the University of Washington, known for its distinctive cross-sectoral approach, its dual accreditation, one of only 2 institutions in the country accredited both for public management and for business on the MBA. Those strengths rest on a very strong foundation. It is, especially given some of the challenges I'm going to talk about in a minute, really important to understand that Willamette is financially a very strong institution. And you can measure that in lots of different ways. Endowment, of course, is the integrated sum of all of the philanthropic giving over those 180 years, the core of the funds that are available to support student financial aid. And the last audited financials are still a year old, June of 21. At that point, the endowment was just under $350 million, second only to Reed among universities in Oregon on a per student basis. Overall net assets that year rose by more than a third. So we are on our balance sheet very strong. The last year, of course, has not been as friendly in the stock market. The endowment, I would guess, will end once all the prices are set on the private investments at something like $320 million, maybe $315 at the end of June of 22, but still a very healthy position. The basis of that, of course, is remarkably generous alumni for many generations now. This pandemic time has been particularly exciting in many ways to see the way that our alumni have stepped up at a time when our students have higher than normal need. In each of the last 2 years, our annual fund unrestricted giving was about $2.7 million. Before the pandemic, our record was $2 million, so a significant increase in unrestricted giving. And both years, we raised almost $18 million in total commitments each year. Those gifts cover the whole institution: gifts for health sciences, gifts for the humanities, gifts for the data science, and many, many scholarship gifts to support our students. But we have many challenges. We, of course, have been dealing with COVID as an immediate health issue for several years. We have operated safely and successfully through COVID, only going fully online during those first few months when the governor required all educational institutions to go online. But that successful operation has come at significant cost. It's come at a cost for for new air filters, for reduced density in the dormitories, all kinds of things. And it's come at a cost because our students, especially in that first year of the pandemic, when many, many parents saw job disruption, we had higher student aid needs. And so our financial aid budget went up substantially the last 2 years. Overall, the institution's enrollment and retention are okay. They're fine in the graduate schools, but the undergraduate residential classes in Salem really struggled during the pandemic. The classes of 24 and 25, so the class that started last fall and the fall before that, are both very small by historic standards, mostly losing the students who would normally come to us from California and further afield, reflecting the fact that during those 2 years, there was a lot of uncertainty in families about their willingness to travel for higher education. And we were unable to bring students to campus for our visit days. We also still, in many cases, are not able to send counselors out to high schools. So for students who are further away from the campus, who didn't have a good understanding of what we offered, we didn't have a good way to show them what we do here in Salem, and that's reflected in our enrollment numbers. The class of 26, so the students who are coming this fall, in contrast, is a very large class. As of this morning, we have 540 registered first-time freshmen. We have another 35 transfer students, so a total of 575 incoming students on the Salem campus, another 150 undergraduates in Portland that I'll talk about, and perhaps another 250 graduate students across all of our schools. So 950 overall new students arriving later this month, which is very exciting. But those two small classes that we have will be with us for a while. It means 3 years when we are significantly down in residential enrollment. That means 3 years of significant revenue challenges, a real hole in the operating budget there. For fiscal year of 22, last year, fiscal year 23, our current year, and expected in fiscal year 24. Fortunately, before the pandemic, we have been prudently managed. We substantially increased our reserves over the last decade. We actually covered our deficit last year entirely with ready cash. This year and next year, we will be drawing on long-term reserves, but only we will leave more long-term reserves after these next 2 years in the rainy day fund than we started the last decade with. So it's a unpleasant challenge, but not an unsurmountable challenge, and not one that has caused substantial cuts across the institution. Nationally, it is a really challenging time in lots of ways for higher education. Unparalleled demographic challenges I'll say a little bit more about. Financially, family real incomes have been flat for a long time. They actually went up a little bit in the early years of the pandemic in our groups of students, but college costs continue to climb even faster. And I'll say a little bit more about that. Student expectations of what colleges need to provide have changed in some very complicated ways. And as anybody knows who reads the newspaper, including today's Wall Street Journal and last week's New York Times, traditional liberal arts colleges have become political targets across the whole spectrum as elitist institutions in certain circles, or as intolerant institutions as seen in other circles. And we can talk more about that. But with all of those challenges, the benefits that students receive from a college education, not just the financial benefits, but the life benefits in longevity and health, in happiness, are as great as they've ever been. And this work that we're doing is really important and worth fighting through the challenges. But to say just a little bit more about those challenges, so this is the demographic summary. These are the number of high school graduates in the western region of the United States. The thin line is measurement. As the line gets thicker, the estimates become more and more important. But since you can track the number of kindergartners, you know pretty well what the number of high school graduates 12 years later is going to be. So it's a pretty reliable set of numbers. And what you see is the first substantial sustained decrease in high school graduation rates in many years. And for the first time, a decrease in high school graduation numbers at the same time that the fraction of high school graduates who go on to college is not itself rising. So there have been other periods where the number of graduates of high school have gone down, but at times when the fraction of high school graduates that went to college was relatively low. So there was still growth going on in college going numbers. That will not be true this time. This curve has actually turned more negative since it was made because with the pandemic, a significant number of high school students, about 1 million high school students, have gone missing, essentially, nationally. And so we have actually seen this turnover starting already instead of peaking a few years from now and turning downwards. But all higher education institutions have to deal with the fact that we are working in an environment where the number of traditionally aged undergraduate students will be going down for a generation, a long time. And that's when you break that down and look at the racial and ethnic demographics, there are some surprises there. Those of us in the business think about the fact that Hispanic student numbers have been growing pretty rapidly for a long time, especially here in the West. And you see that in the second set of bars. But Hispanic student numbers will start to fall within the next couple of years too, because of lower birth rates and lower immigration rates. And so we actually see almost all groups of students, except for students that identify with 2 or more races and Asian American students, will start to fall in the next couple of years. And this great rapid diversification of higher education will actually start to flatten out and change much more slowly in the years ahead as those Hispanic student numbers start to fall. If you look in more detail at the West by state, this is a color-coded plot from 2012 to 2032 of predicted high school graduation numbers, with the blue being decreases, darker blue being bigger decreases. And what you see is that Texas is the only state that sees real growth, and California, actually, surprisingly to lots of people, is the place that sees the biggest drop. And because more than a third of our undergraduates come from California, that's a really important thing for Willamette to understand and manage. So how do we respond to that? Well, first, we continue the program we've been on for generations, which is expand access to higher education, and specifically to our kind of higher education, to groups that have been historically underrepresented in this kind of institution. So serve more students in our core mission. As I'll say a lot more about, a second piece is to expand the breadth of what we offer to serve students who would not previously have looked at Willamette. I mean, there are a lot of students who apply only to public institutions, who apply to larger institutions, who don't understand that a school like Willamette can give them a good start in the direction that they want to go. And so reaching out and talking more effectively with students who don't have liberal arts colleges on their short lists is a big part of our strategy. And to understand why that's so important, it's really useful to know that the 3 biggest interest areas, if you poll high school seniors, by a long ways, these 3 are way ahead of anybody else, are business, biomedical programs, and engineering programs, which are, of course, 3 interest areas that liberal arts colleges have not done a very good job of helping students understand how their interests connect to what we offer. And so we're focusing a lot on that. And then finally, just understanding that even as the undergraduate numbers saturate and start to fall, graduate enrollment still has a significant possibility for growth. The graduate programs we offer are increasingly valuable to students, and they're increasingly necessary to students in many walks of life. And so we will continue to rebalance our program mix and grow graduate programs. So financially, the situation is really complicated. And I've talked with alumni groups. I could easily spend a couple of hours talking about college finance. The bottom line is that it's just a really tough situation. Our list price, when adjusted for inflation in that decade between 07 and 17, so basically the pre-pandemic decade went up by about 27%, while the median income adjusted for inflation for the students we admitted, the family income went down by 2%. Our response, of course, was to greatly increase financial aid. And so the average cost, the average actual sticker price, the average price on the bill that students paid actually only went up by about 8% over that decade, even as the list price of tuition went up by 27%. 8% is still a lot bigger than minus 2%. And so it's still a real challenge. But it's not as big a challenge as it looks, but only because of diversion of funds and new philanthropic gifts for financial aid. We've tried to address this head on more directly since then. Between 20 and 21, we repriced our undergraduate programs for a variety of reasons, but including price transparency, and cut our tuition price by $10,000 or about 20%. We've also been squeezing expenses everywhere we can to hold down costs for students. But our long-term goal, it's very difficult to reduce cost at a high-touch environment like a liberal arts college. So the long-term goal is to try to reduce costs by increasing efficiency. And the best way to increase efficiency is to increase the number of students who are sharing the costs of the fixed infrastructure of running a university, the library, the president's office, the health center to some extent, and so on. So I'm going to talk a lot about growth. Student expectations are changing. Increasingly, students are interested not in going to small, rural, isolated campuses like I went to in Northfield, Minnesota. They're looking for larger, more urban campuses. This is actually an advantage for Willamette. Being downtown in Salem is a more interesting environment for many of today's students than, say, Walla Walla, Washington. Students also are, for a variety of understandable reasons, more concerned about their own financial future and are increasingly favoring programs where they can see a direct connection to employment, which has not been a particular focus for liberal arts colleges like Willamette. That means for us that we have been both more direct about building programs that are more transparently linked to outcomes, but also investing in internships and getting students experience in the workforce. And we've done some significant expansions and reorganization in career services and brought the 10 career services staff we now have together across the university in one centralized office to support our students. Student needs for mental health services have, if you read the newspaper, increased substantially. That's true actually for young people who aren't in college as well. But it's a large burden for colleges to figure out how to support students in this area that society is not currently supporting them. And then the needs of being a campus that is really truly inclusive for a more racially, ethnically, and socioeconomically diverse student body, but also a student body that is more diverse in disabilities of various kinds, including neurodivergent students who have different support needs for academic support, and LGBT students and others. And so we have been investing in making sure that the campus is meeting the needs of those students. So just to give you a brief summary of all of that, Willamette is fundamentally in a very strong financial position, and we continue to be recognized as a regional quality leader really across all of the programs that we offer. But our core market is a shrinking market, and it is both shrinking in number and shrinking in its ability to pay for the services that we provide. We are serving academically really strong students. Our undergraduate campus in Salem will be enrolling its strongest class in history this fall with adjusted GPAs of 4. And it is a diverse set of students that increasingly reflects the true diversity of the Western United States. And that's all wonderful. But there aren't as many of these students, and these students can't afford the services that we would like to provide for them. And increasingly, these students, especially first-gen students, believe that a liberal education is not the best path to financial security. So to address all of that, I really summarize this with the bigger, broader, bolder message. We need to be bigger. Being bigger gives us economies of scale. It gives us a more vibrant and engaging environment, and it gives us ways to grow in emerging fields or fields that are emerging as important in different ways to our students without having to eviscerate the existing strengths that we're so proud of on campus. So growth is important and really hard in a demographically declining environment, but not impossible if we think carefully about breadth. We need to be broader for that reason. We also need to be broader because the needs of the Northwest are changing. In the mid-19th century, it was okay to be an institution that educated teachers and preachers and doctors and lawyers, as they used to say. But today, the Northwest is a dynamic, complex region, increasingly dominated by knowledge industries, increasingly connected around the Pacific Rim in new and different ways. And we need to make sure that the students that we are educating are ready to be leaders in that environment, which means offering some different programs in different ways. And then finally, we really need to be bolder. It's not enough to just be a 19th century liberal arts college. It's not enough even to be a 20th century R1 research university built to serve the needs of the Cold War. We need to be an institution which is tuned to the needs of the 21st century, which means being willing to go in some different directions in how we build programs, how we think about connecting the different parts of the institution to each other. So I'm going to say quite a bit more about that. But to lead us into that, I want to say just a few things about university classification. Again, I could spend an hour talking about the U.S. News and World Report's ranking systems and the damage that U.S. News rankings have created in higher education, and the costs that quite literally are being paid by students for the competitive convergence that's been driven by the U.S. News rankings. But I want to focus today on the fact that the U.S. News rankings, when they were introduced in the 1980s, really established a language for higher education that has led institutions down some unproductive paths. And the real issue is that by carving all of higher education, like Olive Gall, into three parts, there are three ways to be a university, and there are three idealized models of universities that each institution has chosen to optimize themselves around. The first category is the National Liberal Arts Colleges. Jerry Hudson in the mid-1980s made what was at the time a really important and just far-sighted decision to reclassify Willamette as a National Liberal Arts College. But it led Willamette to think of itself in a particular way, which has been, in the last few years, not as productive. Their National Liberal Arts College, the archetype of a National Liberal Arts College is at Williams or at Carleton, these mostly rural institutions, which are undergraduate only and exist as bubbles, sort of academic hothouses. But not all liberal arts colleges look like that. Willamette, of course, has always had its professional schools. Lewis and Clark has some professional schools. And there are a number of other institutions which are similar in some ways to Willamette. Some archetypes that we might look to as analogs within the National Liberal Arts College list include Washington and Lee, Richmond, Bucknell, and Drew, which cover a broad range of wealth bands, most of them significantly wealthier than us, most of them a little bit bigger than us, but otherwise similar in lots of ways, but very undergraduate focused. The second group of institutions is what Willamette was before its reclassification, a regional university. These are institutions which are not usually focused on the liberal arts. They tend to be professionally dominated undergraduate programs, often offering some master's programs. And the U.S. News rankings has listed those as North, South, Midwest, or Western institutions. But looking nationally, again, there are a few regional institutions which look like Willamette in some interesting ways. Elon, Drake, St. Mary's being examples, all significantly less wealthy than Willamette, most significantly larger than Willamette, but with some similarities in the kinds of programs that they offer. And then finally, the second prestige category in U.S. News are the so-called national universities. These are almost exact overlaps with what are often called the R1 universities, the big research universities, flagship publics, and the wealthy privates. Most of them are focused very much on graduate education and the preparation of doctoral students. Almost all of them are financially dominated by sponsored research projects. But within that group of national universities, there are, again, some that share some characteristics with Willamette. Dartmouth, Rice, and William and Mary all are similar in some really interesting ways to us, although all significantly wealthier than Willamette. So the decision that every university has made since 1985 is which of these three categories do we want to fit into, and how do we shape ourselves to improve ourselves on the rankings at US News? And what I will argue is that we really don't want to do that anymore. We really need to be willing to say that the US News rankings have outlived their purpose and have become a real drag on innovation in higher education. And instead, we want to think about Willamette as being an institution which draws from the strengths of all three of these categories in a new and different way that better meets the needs of this century. So like the best national liberal arts colleges, Willamette really is focused on teaching and learning and does it at a very high level. Not something that the big research universities are known for. Like the best national universities, we are an interestingly complex institution. We have real breadth in the professional schools, which give us resources that the national liberal arts colleges mostly don't have. And we can be a real leader in building innovative and high quality programs in ways that schools like Dartmouth and Rice have been known as national leaders. And then, like the best regional universities, we are really firmly grounded in our region. We always have been grounded in the economic, cultural, and natural environment of Oregon and the Northwest. And we are especially committed to preparing leaders who are going to help this region flourish. And we need to recognize and honor all three of those aspects of Willamette's identity. So as we think about what that looks like in practice, I want to talk through three initiatives from the last 2 or 3 years and how they have set patterns to change Willamette. The BS in Business Management, the Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degrees in Data Science, and the merger with PNCA. And they each have different lessons to offer the institution. So starting with business. We used to have many of you remember, some of you were graduates with a business economics degree. It was closed in 2001. I think we're our last graduates in business econ. When it was closed, it was our largest major. And since it was closed, our only explicit path for new business students is the 3-2 joint degree program, a wonderful program, a nationally prominent program, but a program that requires students to commit to 5 years in order to get both the Bachelor of Arts and the MBA degree, which is something that many high school students just are not ready to do as they're thinking about choosing a school. As I said, business is the biggest interest area for new college students. And you see that at our peers that have business programs. So UPS, about 20% of their students are enrolled in business related programs. Linfield, that number is much higher than that, even though neither one of those two schools is accredited by AACSB, which is the leading business school accreditor. Most liberal arts colleges, the Whitmans of the world, the Lewis and Clarks of the world, struggle to offer any courses in business finance or entrepreneurship, because they just don't have the faculty expertise. You can take a course from an economist in business, you can take a course from a communications person in marketing, but they don't have the depth of faculty expertise needed to build high quality programs. And that's been a really stubborn problem for us. Our CIS faculty do not have the expertise to offer a high quality business program. But right across the street from CIS, we have the Atkinson School, the best management school in Oregon, highly ranked programs nationally, and one of the top 10 schools recently nationally in entrepreneurship. It's a wonderful resource if we can just figure out how to use it. And so what we've done is decided we were going to use that resource. So we built a new major, not in the College of Arts and Sciences, but in the Atkinson School. First, the Atkinson faculty built a minor with 5-course core. And then this last year, starting last September, that was expanded to an accredited business major with 13 AGSM courses. Some of them will be offered for the first time next year or the following year. Mandatory internship and prerequisites in stats and econ in the Arts and Sciences College, and the same gen ed requirements that any other major in our Salem campus requires. And the interest is phenomenal. If you look at the students who are coming in this fall to Willamette, all through admission season, business and psychology have been neck and neck for the most popular major, even though this was the first year we've advertised the fact that we offer a business major. So really good success from the beginning there. Behind the scenes, this is a really important move for Willamette. It seems like all we're doing is we're adding a new major. And what could be easier than adding a new business major if we have the faculty? But it was an enormously complex and very important move. And the reason for that is what I just referred to, which is the move of undergraduate education from being something which is entirely identified with the College of Arts and Sciences, the old College of Liberal Arts, under the control of a single faculty, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and a single dean. Now, undergraduate education at Willamette is a university-level activity. We have a provost to whom the deans report. The provost oversees undergraduate education, working in collaboration with deans from across the campus. And undergraduate education is the shared responsibility of all of our faculties on campus now. To make that work, everything we do in the background, admissions, commencement, and everything in between had to be rethought from a university perspective instead of a college perspective. The result is now Willamette is a university that can offer programs that span across the institution in ways that would not have been possible 2 or 3 years ago, which looking ahead is going to be an enormously important new source of flexibility for us. So that was project number one. Project number two was to roll out a new set of degree programs in data science. Data science, for those who have not been paying attention, has very quickly emerged as one of the fastest growing fields for new jobs, certainly, but a field that is connected almost literally across the entire economy as the analysis of large data sets becomes important in business and nonprofits and governmental organizations. Computational skills are now needed in half of all top quartile salary jobs in the country. And so as we think about what skills all of our students should have, computation and data analysis is increasingly becoming really high priority for us. Existing programs, especially programs like the sort of boot camp programs that teach programming, but really even existing programs in large universities tend to focus either on highly specialized areas like teaching people how to use the tools of bioinformatics, or on very ephemeral technical skills, how to use a particular programming language to do data visualization, for example. We strongly believe at Willamette in building capacities and generalizable skills that support students even as the environment around the students changes, which means that we need to look to the generic management analogies in AGSM or the liberal education analogies in CAS and think about how to build data science as a broad set of capacities that we're introducing our students to. So at Willamette, data science really connects across the entire institution in some really interesting ways. And so building data science as an institution level project has been really important to us. So the long-term goal is to unify computer and data science with design thinking and with the liberal arts to establish a new type of school, sort of a West Coast analog of the Idea Lab at MIT, if you know anything about that. As first steps, we founded a new governance structure, a so-called committee of studies that drew on faculty from across our existing schools that the board delegated authority to develop and offer a BS in computer science and an MS in data science. The first cohort of MS students graduated a year ago, including the first 4+ a summer joint degree student who got both a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science. We have certificate programs for the MBA students and JD students. And students have been doing really well. Both the undergraduate and graduate students have been making waves in national and international competitions against really, really strong comparator schools. Just as a sort of comparison, the same year we started working on data science, University of Oregon established a presidential level initiative on data science, recognizing how important that was going to be for them. They put together a committee, a task force of deans and others to build something. They graduated their first undergraduates last year. They had 7 data science students. They are 10 times our size. We graduated last spring 5 data science students, 4 data science minors, 2 certificates, and 12 Master of Science program recipients. University of Oregon hasn't even launched their Master of Science program yet. So that flexibility that comes from being a small and really highly focused institution has been great. That first group of students came in with 6-figure average salaries after the master's degree. And the end result has been huge interest in the program. We will have 3 times as many students starting this program at the master's level this fall as we did last year. And we have 100 students registered as undergraduate students in the introductory data science class on campus this year. So it's tremendously exciting to a lot of people on campus. Again, the real story is the capacity it builds for change at Willamette. All the joint degree programs we've ever offered have been so-called handoff programs. You start in one school, you get passed off to another school at some point. They're really carefully designed, they're really high quality programs, but they minimize the interactions between the schools. The Committee of Studies, in contrast, really fully integrates faculty in a shared program that they are jointly responsible for building and sustaining. And we can use that model now that we've established it in a variety of other places. The first place we will use it is the launch, probably about a year from now, of a new Master of Science in Computer Science, most likely based in Portland, that integrates AGSM CAS and PNCA, the Pacific Northwest College of Art faculty who work on visualization and design together to build a MS degree that's really focused around human interface design, human computer interactions, creative computing, and to do some really interesting things that nobody else in the region currently are doing that connect to some of the areas where Portland in particular is especially interested economically in building programs. So we're really excited about that. So finally, let me end with, in some ways, the biggest of the moves of the last couple of years, which was the merger of the Pacific Northwest College of Art into Willamette. This is now a year old. The merger became official on July 1st last summer. PNCA, for those who don't know it, is the former museum school from the Portland Art Museum, the Northwest flagship independent art and design school. And it is now part of Willamette, augmenting the strengths that we already had with Halliford Museum, the Artists Archives, and our wonderful performing arts programs, especially on the Salem campus. This also brought to Willamette a significant physical campus, the old Federal Building, which has been really nicely renovated at the north end of the North Park blocks on the border of the Pearl in Portland. And I'm going to just very quickly run you through a slide deck, which was prepared by Kate Copeland, who was the acting dean at PNCA before we hired a long-term dean, just to show you a little bit about the breadth of PNCA and what is coming into Willamette with the acquisition of this program. They are a school with a broad range of both undergraduate and graduate programs, lots of majors, graduate programs at both the MA and the MFA program, as well as a pre-COVID anyway, a very large community education program, which we anticipate will return over the next year or two as COVID concerns are reduced. It has about 600 students. 3/4 of those are undergraduates. And just some slides to show you on the history. So it was founded as the Museum Art School in 1909. It has a long and distinguished history with many really well-known and celebrated alumni. It became independent of the museum, moved to the Pearl District, and then to its current location in 2015. The building it's in, as I say, is a beautiful facility, well tuned to the needs of the art school, but also the nucleus of a home in Portland for Willamette's programs more broadly over the next couple of years. Just to show you a little bit of the student work and the range of activities in the programs there. Illustration is one of their biggest majors. Animated arts is another of their very large and very successful and well-regarded programs. Graphic design, which is highly connected to a lot of the creative industry in Portland. Photography, painting, the other traditional arts, printmaking, sculpture, video production, the creative writing program, which actually began its life at Merrillhurst as a low residency program and then moved when Merrillhurst closed to PNCA. Intermedia, this is the Hallie Ford, I lost my font here, the Hallie Ford School of Graduate Studies. The Hallie Ford connection tells you something about the pre-existing relationship between these schools. MFAs in visual studies and applied craft and design, collaborative design, design systems, print media, MA in critical studies, the low residency MFA programs in visual studies and creative writing. Behind the scenes, again, this it sort of looks easy to just bring these two institutions, which both had really strong reputations and distinguished faculty together. In fact, mergers in higher education are exceedingly rare, except involving institutions that are on the verge of closure, which are, those kind of mergers really are alternatives to closure that protect the assets and the student body of an institution. This kind of merger between two healthy, strong institutions is really, really unusual. The secret sauce that made it possible, and I've talked now with a lot of college presidents, including a panel in Chicago last month, is that Willamette's unique structure that has these self-governing faculties in our schools allowed us to bring PNCA in a way that helped preserve, certainly didn't threaten its culture, its history, and its existing programs. And that was something we didn't understand until we started talking about mergers a few years ago, but has made it possible to think about things that other institutions wouldn't be able to do. PNCA had talked to other institutions before we convinced them to come to us, but this is why it made sense to join Willamette. This, of course, immediately broadened our mission. As I say, the art and design, and especially the really strong and growing design program at PNCA is highly connected to Portland's economy. And it's very connected to the broader arts ecosystem in the Northwest. And especially at the boundaries, if we think about arts management, if we think about fashion studies, with connections to the arts and sciences faculty, if we think about creative computing or visualization, there are some real opportunities to do some new things that PNCA was unable to do when it was on its own. Just to take one example, if you think about fashion studies, fashion is a really important industry in Portland. Nike, Columbia, Adidas, Keen, I guess the list is all there. There are very few professional programs with a fashion focus in the Western United States. None closer than the California College of Art in San Francisco. There's a Bachelor of Arts program, a non-professional program at the University of Oregon, but educating professionals, PNCA, could be the only game in town in this really economically important area. So we're really exploring how to build something out between Atkinson faculty, PNCA faculty, CIS faculty in sociology and other departments to do some new and interesting things here. So just to bring this part of this to a close, just to summarize, well, the rest of the world was really hunkered down with COVID and just trying to manage through this really, really difficult time. We've been really busy. We added this large new school, the new interdisciplinary committee, and became the leading private art and design school in the Northwest. So undergraduate education has become this institution-wide program now. We now have 2 full-fledged campuses, one in the commercial center of Oregon, the other in the public center of Oregon. We've retooled our entire administrative structure. It's still work in progress, but a huge amount of reorganization of IT support, advancement, the library, student affairs to support cross-institutional initiatives. And we've strengthened our balance sheet, even though we've been running an operating deficit now for just over a year and expect to continue to run one for another couple of years. We brought in substantial assets with the acquisition of PNCA. We've had successful fundraising years and successful investment years, which have allowed us to increase financial aid support for students. And of course, we ran the university during this global pandemic.
Steve, we've had one question from our guests that I think is relevant to this idea of the things we've done to expand and be bigger and broader. And that was why wouldn't the MS in education come back? I tried to answer it online, but I thought you could
So I'll pick that up here after this slide. So this is my final slide, just where are we going? And that fits into that question of where we're going. Over the next 5 years, the growth of the campus is going to be driven by what we've already committed to. So growth in the business program, the computer and data science programs. Just with that, we expect to grow from about 2,300 to 3,000 full-time students. Over the next decade, the board is really looking to continue to grow the campus by perhaps another 1,000 students to 4,000. That would be about our capacity, depending on how they're divided between the campuses and divided between undergraduate and graduate work for our current facilities, our residence halls and our classroom facilities. It would require new lease space in Portland, but not substantial new capital construction. Maybe some small buildings, some renovations, but nothing huge. If we try to grow but beyond 4,000, we would start to have to invest substantially in new capital projects. And at some point, we stop gaining the advantages of scale because the infrastructure starts to scale with the number of students. You start to need more library staff, for example, than we currently have. So that's probably about the sweet spot where we can balance the benefits of size and complexity with the scale that allows the continued personal touch that's been Willamette's hallmark. And then over 20 years, Shelby has a goal of building the endowment out to $1 billion. If you think back to those lists of comparator institutions, that $1 billion level endowment is really where an institution needs to be to fully control its own destiny, to be able to invest in the students it wants to invest, to intentionally build the classes it wants to build in order to optimize the strength and diversity of the classes that it's serving. And that would be essentially what's needed to securely establish Willamette as the Northwest's leading private university. So that's the big goal out there. That's not this coming campaign. It's not the campaign after that, but it is the bicentennial goal for the university. So I'm going to end the presentation there, and I'll pick up that question about growth because there is, if you go beyond 5 years, we can grow out to about 3,200 students with the current set of programs. Growth beyond that will require us thinking about growing in some new areas. Education is certainly one that is always on the table. Biomedical programs are an obvious area where there's potential in the right subdisciplines. As we've thought about growth, we've developed a rubric for how to think about where we want to grow our programs. And the basic idea is that as we add programs, we need to be sure that those programs can be self-sustaining. We are not in a position, at least today, of strongly subsidizing new growth, and we are not, especially given that we are serving a high-need student population, we're not in a position of asking our undergraduate students, for example, to subsidize growth in graduate programs. So we do need to be conscious of the sustainability of new programs. We want to grow in areas that are coherent with the liberal arts, we sometimes say, but are certainly consistent with Willamette's quality brand. We want to make sure that we have a credible path to being, say, one of the top 3 programs in the region in any program that we start. Because anything else is really undermining what makes Willamette a special institution. And then finally, we want to grow in areas where we can see clear synergies between our schools so that we're improving the quality of at least a large fraction of the campus, if not all of our schools, by growing in an area that's connected to those. So we don't want to build siloed programs. So that's the set of criteria we're thinking about as we think about new programs. As we think about education, the Master of Arts in Teaching program, I mean, when we closed the Master of Arts in Teaching program, it was with a clear statement that Willamette continues to be in the business of educating teachers. Education is a really important part of leadership for the Pacific Northwest, but our niche, at least for now, is in subject matter instruction. We are providing the highest quality math instruction for future math teachers, for English teachers, language teachers, and so on. And so the core mission of the College of Arts and Sciences continues to be very cognizant of the needs of future teachers. The Master of Arts in Teaching program became a very difficult area for us to compete because of the way that the state structures its requirements, which makes the programs very rigid. There's not a lot of opportunity for distinctiveness or a lot of value placed on quality in that program by the people who hire the teachers. And there's a lot of focus on cost. And so in Oregon, a large fraction of the Master of Arts in Teaching program has now moved to online and low-cost providers, which were really difficult to do in a way consistent with Willamette's brand. If you look beyond the MAT and think about the needs for leadership in education, programs for future principals or superintendents, for support of policy work and the like, I think there are some really interesting opportunities for us to explore connections between our schools now that we have ways to build joint programs between arts and sciences, say in Atkinson, as we think about nonprofit management expertise to do some new and different things where we really can offer something distinctive to the region and to our students. And so that's a good example of the kind of consideration that's currently underway in early stages in a lot of different fields, but certainly education is one of them.
Okay, Steve, we have a bunch of questions. One of them, not surprisingly, several people have asked about CST and the status of that.
Yeah. So I made a reference to what we've learned about mergers, and some of you may remember in previous conversations I've been involved even before coming to Willamette in discussions about mergers with a merger opportunity at UC Santa Cruz that I served on the committee for that ultimately was not brought to completion in that case because we decided that the faculty were not at the standard that we needed. CST, that was not the problem. It was a wonderful school. We would have loved to move forward, but we have brought those merger discussions to a close. And the problem we ran into was a simple financial issue that CST could not gain clear title to their property. Their property is very heavily mortgaged. Effectively, they have a very large outstanding loan, which is secured by the property, and they can't sell the property. And so they are in a very difficult position at the moment. And we are not in a position to take on that large debt that it comes with them. So they have, for a variety of reasons relating to the lawsuits over the property, brought everybody back together in Southern California to establish use of the property again, so that they can argue they haven't vacated it. And that's made it difficult to continue the collaborations here in Salem. But we do continue to have faculty from CST living here, part of our academic community, and continue to talk with them about the future of collaborations between the two institutions. It's going to be hard to do anything substantive until they are clear of their debt, because we can't put ourselves in a position of finding ourselves responsible for repaying the debts that they incurred. So that limits the ability to develop formal relationships, but we care a lot about their mission. If, for example, they were eventually pushed to the really unfortunate outcome of having to go bankrupt and reorganize, you could imagine that would open up some different opportunities for discussing how Willamette could contribute to the mission that they are currently pursuing. So we still care a lot about that. It's just unfortunate we haven't been able to find a way through that legal thicket.
Thank you. Questions about diversity at Willamette and what goals have been established?
Yeah, so I mean, our basic goal at Willamette is that our student body is reflective of the regions that we serve, which are different in the different schools. So that leads to slightly different articulations of that goal in different places around the university. And there's an equity component that students from recognizable subgroups that we can keep track of should not be differentially successful or unsuccessful. Graduation rates should be independent of race and ethnicity and Pell status and the like. So the Board of Trustees, quite a few years ago now, early in the last decade, set a formal set of goals around diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, reflecting the WICHE data, which is the Western data on ethnicity of high school graduates, and that we lead our peer group, the Northwest 5 liberal arts colleges at the undergraduate level, in enrollment of racial and ethnic, historically underrepresented groups, and Pell students, a measure of socioeconomic diversity. And we continue to do that. We have done that since we established the goal and continue to do that. And we continue to make progress toward the absolute number goals. Our shortfalls, currently, our biggest shortfall is actually in Asian American students at the moment. We're pretty close on Native students and Black students. We have some shortfall on Hispanic students, but we are ahead of our peer institutions. On the really important equity goals, we have met those goals too since we started. The only identifiable subgroup on campus that is not currently meeting those goals is male students, who take longer than female students to graduate and ultimately have a measurably lower four-year graduation rate. That's true across higher education, and it's true at Willamette, and something that we pay a lot of attention to. But historically underrepresented racial and ethnic subgroups and Pell students all typically graduate at a higher rate, actually, than historically majority groups, but statistically really indistinguishable rate. So our focus, and then we have similar goals which are set around the Atkinson School and the law school. The Atkinson School, I mean, both of them have been very focused on gender equity because that's been an issue in professional education, and both have done very well in recent years in gender equity. They lag more in racial and ethnic diversity because they draw more locally from Oregon, which doesn't have the kind of diversity that the California and Arizona and Texas students bring to the undergraduate college. But there are specific goals in each of those schools. So,
I know you addressed this a little bit, but how are we managing keeping tuition affordable? And are we, and how does, yeah, that's really the question, is how are we keeping it affordable? I mean, the tuition reset is probably the most substantial.
Yeah, the tuition reset is part of it. I mean, there's a piece of it which is just a relentless focus on cost. It is a really difficult situation that we want to deliver substantially more to our students than we can afford, that our students, frankly, can afford for us to deliver. And so we have to be very thoughtful about how aligned our expenditures are with the core educational mission of the institution. We have tried to be really conscious of the things that make Willamette Willamette. So, for example, in the undergraduate college, the fact that our students are taking courses from long-term permanent tenure track faculty is really key. We don't have the option that the University of Oregon or others have of replacing our expensive tenure line faculty with low-cost adjunct faculty. It would be inconsistent with our mission. But we have let our average number of students per faculty member increase. So it's close to historic numbers. I mean, our target is between 12-1 and 13-1 for student faculty ratios. Whereas for a while there, in the years just before I came, we had set targets as low as 9-1, which are characteristic of some of the wealthiest liberal arts colleges. And rather than replace expensive faculty with cheaper faculty, what we're trying to do is make sure that our expensive faculty are teaching more students, thus reducing the cost per student in a way that doesn't substantially affect the experience, and being really careful about, some kinds of classes can afford to be large without harming the quality of the education. Lecture classes, our history lecture class that has 40 students in it is not a substantially different experience than one with 25 students in it. Whereas a writing seminar really needs to be small. And so thinking carefully about how to deploy our resources in a way that is more cost effective for our students has been important. And then fundraising. Sorry. I mean, I think it's really important. And I mean, I talked about the annual fund, which is almost all essentially goes straight through to supporting students. But if you think about the way that we've been doing large gift fundraising and endowment fundraising for the last 10 years, it is really focused on scholarship fundraising because that's what has the highest impact on students. The easiest campaigns for institutions to run are campaigns for buildings or campaigns for new research centers that offer some really exciting thing that you can connect faculty to some donor passion for. Those are great. They that kind of fundraising enriches the environment at an institution. But in the end, it doesn't have the impact that scholarship fundraising has. And so we have taken this really challenging task of making the case to all alumni, but all friends of Willamette, that student support is really where the need is. And almost all of the funding we've raised in the last 10 years, a very, very large fraction of it has either been direct support for scholarships or it's been support for student internship experiences or other programs that directly affect the cost of or accessibility of the education to our students.
Thank you. Our incoming freshman students, college ready academically. I think this is probably related to COVID and how COVID has impacted student performance in high schools prior to attending college.
Yeah, this is a really good question. It has both COVID and non-COVID pieces to it. So, and some of this, as Willamette has expanded its geographic reach, as we have brought more students from more places, we have had to come to understand a broader range of different state level expectations, graduation requirements, and the like, and think carefully about how we support students who come in with very different math backgrounds, for example. And so even before COVID, we were spending a lot of time thinking about how to make sure that we had the right structures in place so that somebody who wanted to be a pre-medical student, for example, had the right support at the early stages of math and chemistry, so that they could land successfully and get started in a program no matter what their high school background was. That has served us well, I think, in these first years of COVID. I mean, we are seeing a lot more students in the last year or two who are coming into Willamette, not just with academically impoverished junior or senior years, but also socially impoverished, without the kinds of experiences that typically advanced high school students have in peer work on writing, for example. And so figuring out how to make sure that we have the structures in place to help those students get past those deficits as quickly as possible and flourish in college. I mean, the students are all very capable. The students we're bringing in are really, really strong students, and it is a problem beyond their control to have to navigate through the high school experiences that they've had.
Yeah. Several questions about sustainability and climate change. One of the questions was how we are involved in climate change. I don't know if they mean in making the problem worse or making the problem better, but in addition to the sustainability minor and the sustainability programs and the forest at Dina, do you have anything else that you would maybe?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I didn't talk about that will be a little bit more apparent as we start to talk about the new strategic plan at Willamette is that a real focus that we have is thinking about how to prepare students to lead in the so-called wicked problems of the 21st century. So if you think about, say, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, one of which is climate, another is the health of the oceans, another is food security, and the like. The big challenge, global public health is a great example. The big challenges that our students are going to be looked to lead the country and the world through in the middle part of this century are all these really big, complex issues that involve some, depending on the issue, varying mix of a need for scientific understanding, social science, and understanding how people respond to the challenges, policy work and management in crafting and implementing solutions, often legal issues, sometimes with art and design, helping storytelling and communicating as a key part of that. And climate change is a sort of poster child for all of that. And so as we think about how we prepare students to be engaged in really complex issues, climate change is one of the areas in which Willamette is really focused on thinking through how to pull the resources of the institution together in some different ways that big institutions can't do very easily with their deep silos, and small institutions can't do because they don't have the breadth of expertise. And to think about some really high quality opportunities for educating future leaders. Climate change is one of those keys. The sustaining of healthy democratic institutions is another really complex and really important current challenge. And then the use of big data is another cross-cutting, really complex and interesting set of challenges for this century that we expect our students to understand. So we're really focusing on those three areas as prototypes in thinking about how to build a 21st century university that more broadly educates students for these wicked problems that don't have well-defined solutions, that don't have clear paths forward, that involve bringing together expertise across disciplinary and lines as well as professional lines. So that's the most important thing we're doing. It's the core mission, the core educational mission of the institution, and the impact that our students will have on the world after they leave. I mean, we continue to think a lot about how to use the campus as a laboratory for helping students measure, understand, think about policy implications of different opportunities, and of course, direct programs like the work we do at Xena are all parts of that. So I don't know if there are any other questions there, but
I'm trying to keep up with the questions. And so I apologize that I keep going back and forth to different screens. I think, one of the questions that came up from some guests who sent in questions ahead of time, and at least one online, was about, how we deal with the differences of political views that our students might bring to campus and how we try to foster an environment where a critical thinking about ideas from a range of perspectives is welcome. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, this is an issue we spend a lot of time thinking about, certainly in the deans and leadership level, but also at the faculty level. Going back to those questions about are students ready for college? I mean, one of the things that is most challenging at the moment for us in thinking about how to approach the broader preparation of our students for the outside world is just to understand the different way they have experienced high school and social media, and the way that the national polarization and the visibility of the national polarization in their lives has affected the way they think about these issues before they come to Willamette. So student affairs, for example, this year is thinking very carefully about opening days and how they get the right programming in place in opening days to begin these discussions with students about how to have difficult conversations about difficult questions in class and outside of class. And the faculty have been thinking about how you sort of connect that back through to questions around things like disciplinary standards for evidence, and how does a historian think about making an argument about a difficult topic? How does a scientist think about it? And so those kind of conversations are deeply embedded in conversations in the moment in the faculty about the curriculum. I mean, Willamette, of course, in part because of our history in educating public leaders, we're really proud of the sort of breadth of sort of different approaches that our graduates have taken as they go out into the world. Willamette has always been an institution that educates iconoclasts, right? We just celebrated the 100th birthday of Mark Hadfield, who is famous for his willingness to take the hard position, right? And in more recent generations, Lisa Murkowski is another great example of somebody who has been willing to say hard things. Over the last 50 years, we've had 9 Willamette alums in Congress from 5 different states in both parties. And that's thinking about how we can make sure that that future generations of Willamette graduates have that same ability to approach hard questions, whether in political life or in business or civic life, is really important to us. It is, of course, really challenging in this current political environment. I mean, it's challenging in higher ed, it's challenging in K-12, it's challenging outside of the educational system entirely at the moment.
Yes, it is indeed. We're nearing the end of our time. So I wanted to just tell people, if you have any remaining questions, please type them quickly. And Steve, did we cover everything that you wanted to cover? Is there any last remaining? Do you want to brag about data science a little more, or tell us what your favorite bistro cookie is, perhaps?
It's just good to have the bistro back.
It is so good to have the bistro back. We're finally caffeinated again.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. I've had every bistro cookie now, I think, over the last 11 years, and they're all really good. So I don't want to pick a favorite.
Fair enough. Well, thank you to everyone for participating. I love the dialogue. For those of you who asked questions, thank you, Bill. Bill said, great meeting. For those of you who asked questions that I answered online, if you have follow-up, please don't hesitate to email me, sradcliffe@willamette.edu. I'm always thrilled to make sure our alumni and friends get to talk to President Thorsett. I learn things every time I hear him speak. I hope you did too. Thanks, Steve, for giving us your time. I hope you're all staying cool, and just have a great rest of the evening. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. I guess I will go catch the bat.
Catch the bat.